Welcome, everyone. Again, it's so wonderful to see so many people here. Welcome to our Coping with Climate Grief webinar. I am Elliot Silverstein, and I am here with Recustom. I'll introduce myself more in just a sec, but for now, feel free to get settled and take a few deep breaths if you'd like. We'll be starting again more robustly in just a moment. All right. And yes, feel free to share in the chat where you're joining in from today, where you're calling in from. It'd be great to see where, what kind of, national diversity we have, perhaps even international. Hey, great. Looks like, great selection. Oh, Melbourne. Awesome. Boker Tov. Nice to see everyone from so many different spots. Yeah. Oh, I hear you, Rachel. Yeah, it's really hot there in El Paso, Texas. Yeah. Sheffield, UK. Welcome. Great, great. Okay. So as folks are going to continue to filter in, I'll get started. All right. Let me okay, so welcome everyone. Just some ground rules and expectations that I'll just lay out before we dive in. Please be respectful of the space and of each other. Treat others like you'd want to be treated. There will be no oppressive or phobic language tolerated here. So if anyone happens to use any, you will be removed from the space. I'm sure that won't happen, but we just like to say it just in case. So, right, let's actually dive into intros. So yes, I'm Elliot Silverstein. I'm the community manager here at Recustom, and I'm here with my colleague, Rebecca Missel, Director of Partnerships and Content, who's waving. She'll be supporting on tech today. And I'm really excited to be here and to tell you a little bit about Recustom, where you may know us by the name Haggadot.com. We are also behind Haggadot.com, and we are bringing the same we're rebranding as Recustom, and we're bringing the same adaptive kind of style to rituals that we brought to Haggadot.com here to Recustom. So Recustom's our new brand where we're helping folks to adapt ritual to their present moment, to meet their own needs, to create and adapt and explore ritual on their own and with each other. So really excited to have you here, really excited to be talking today about climate and grief and hope and everything else that can come in between. Recustom has several channels on our website, recustom.com, where we have we can support folks with things like holidays, life's big moments, daily rituals, family stories, and care and healing. So the rituals that we'll be talking about today will be available on our site under the daily ritual section, and we'll be linking to those later. All right, so okay, so we're going to start off with a brief grounding meditation. So this is totally opt-in. If you are not one to meditate, that is totally okay. You can sit this one out. But if you'd like to participate, feel free to close your eyes or lower your gaze and take just a deep breath. And you can feel the energy of the universe moving through you. This is world-making and creative energy. You can breathe in and think about inspiration as just another word for breathing in. You can hold just for a moment, breathe out, feel the release of energy. And you can bring to mind a place that you hold dear, that feels like a home to you. Somewhere in nature, or even somewhere urban where nature is still present in some way. When you've called that place to mind, think about what kinds of sounds you hear in that place and what kinds of sensations you feel when thinking about it. What does that place smell like to you? When was the last time you were physically present there? How clearly do you remember this place? And what does it feel like to think about it now? You can also ask yourself, why does this place feel like home to you? What about it has those supportive kinds of qualities? You can also take a moment to silently tell this place what it means to you. And if it feels okay to do so, you can place a hand over your heart and feel yourself rooting here in this place of your reality, but also of your imagination, of your past, also of your present. Know that you can always come back to this visualization. Know that this is just one of the places that you want to protect against climate destruction. Whenever you're ready, you can thank the place and come back to your body in this moment in front of the Zoom screen. You can open your eyes when you're ready if they were closed. You can remove your gaze from where it was perhaps down or away from the screen and come back to the screen. And you can open your eyes. Okay. I would love to know if anything came up for you in that meditation just now. And while you're thinking about that, I'd also love to know what difficult thoughts and feelings, excuse me one moment. Yes, what difficult thoughts and feelings come up for you when you think about climate change? And with those feelings, what's helping you feel hopeful? So yeah, it might take a moment to just think about it. If anything came up for you that you want to share, feel free to share in the chat. You can also share anything that's coming up for you just around climate change in general, or about your feelings of, anxiety, hope, fear. Yes, Martha, thank you. It seems so overwhelming, but I know that if we work together, we can still make a difference. Yes, absolutely. Tish says, I am hopeful when I see that what young people are organizing to do and also Indigenous people's wisdom. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Maggie says, difficult thoughts and feelings are a loss of control, overwhelming. Hopeful is the small actions I see every day, being surrounded by so many passionate people. Diane says, I am concerned about the future of this planet for my 3-year-old grandson and all children. Yes, that intergenerational fear. Yes, absolutely. The denial that is all around me, Rabbi Yosu says. Hope, realizing that there are people like in this gathering. Yes, thank you. Read a couple more. Victoria says, constantly feeling inundated with news about climate change, feeling hopeful it is on more folks' radar and that there is a lot of work being done in lots of spaces. And Ali Evershine shares, I feel great sorrow while also feeling hope. Yes, yes, all of these are so real and so true. Thank you so much for sharing. Seeing that the major media has finally gotten the message and is sharing it. Thank you. Right, we're going to take a small break from this conversation. Sorry, one moment, please, as I just stop sharing my screen for just a moment so I can see all of you. And we are going to just launch a quick poll. I can do that actually. Yes, let's see. Let's launch these. Okay, so this is a poll that's just coming up just to see where some of you are coming from today. We'd love to know what generation you identify as and how you heard about this event. And this will just be up for a minute. love to get your thoughts on, yeah, just where you're coming in from. Wonderful. Great. Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll close in just a few seconds. So get in your polls. Thank you so much. Okay, I'll stop now. Thank you. All right. Anna or Anna, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, also shared in the chat, worry, sadness coming up, hopeful when we see action being taken and movement forward. Hopeful when in spaces like this with others who share the concern. Tish says some of us are older than boomers. Oh, hats off to you, Tish. Yes, the silent generation. Thank you. Arline says, I feel angry and sad angry because I knew about this in the 80s and it could have been prevented. But like the rabbi said, groups like this help me to have hope. Thank you so much. Okay, and feel free to keep reading these feelings and thoughts as they come in through the chat. I won't be reading any more right now, just so we can move on to more slides. But thank you so much for sharing. It's really wonderful. I really appreciate your shares. And I will just share my screen again. Okay. Oops, actually, let's go back here. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about resilience through ritual and why it's so important, or why we think perhaps it's so important for ritual and climate change to be together. But first, let's talk about why think about climate change now and why in a Jewish context. So there's a few things I can say about this, and I'm sure you all have your own responses to this. But what's predominantly on my mind, and maybe on your mind as well, is that the signs are just inescapable now. If they weren't before, they sure aren't now. And we're having rising smoke and air quality alerts all over the continental US, wildfires, worsening storms, hurricanes, rising temperatures, you name it. And another thing that I think is really important to name in this space is that climate change is exacerbating the already rampant inequality that people are facing in this country as well. Under-resourced communities are hit much harder by resurging and worsening storms and pollution. In addition, many of the root causes of climate change are also some of the root causes of pandemics. So for example, deforestation causes animal habitats to be destroyed and for animals to migrate, and increasing the risk of contact between animals and humans in order to spread those pathogens further. So that's something also that I think it's important to think about. But before we, I know it's easy sometimes to spiral into, oh no, well, what can we possibly do? But let's also think about, why are we talking about this in a Jewish context? And there's a few reasons for this webinar here today. One, it is our focus, it is our own context. So of course, we might want to think about climate change in our own context as Jews. But in addition, with the Jewish commandment towards tikkun olam, or repairing the world, we're not called to just sit on the sidelines, right? We're called to engage in the work of healing and repair. We're also commanded to not destroy. So this commandment of bal tashchit. And as Jews, we're really well situated, I think, to make an intervention in climate justice efforts. So why talk about grief and climate change? Love to hear anyone's thoughts in the chat around this. Why talk about this? A lot of us are feeling it. Why are we actually here talking about it today? Is this helpful? What do you think? I'm curious to hear if anyone wants to share.
I'll share real quick on this.
Sure. Go for it.
Thanks for doing this. I'm in Boise, Idaho area, and I'm involved with Interfaith Power and Light as well. And this came up in an earlier discussion about just the deep emotional problems that people feel around this that really aren't hardly addressed. Like, everything is about policy, everything is about the mind, everything is about practical solutions. And there's just so much angst, and that's like at the root of what we're dealing with. So I think this whole space dealing with this needs to get much more attention. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, absolutely agree with you there. It does seem like there's much of the attention is on our minds, and a lot of it also has to be on our bodies and hearts and spirits. Definitely, yes. Yes, Thank you. Folks are sharing a lot in the chat as well. Read some of these. It's necessary to process this grief in order to take action, just like any grief around the loss of a person. Yeah, absolutely. We can feel it in our bodies. We can feel it in our hearts. Yeah, it can be really destabilizing. I hear you. Yeah. And then, yes, Fred says so much is already lost and so much more will be lost. Much can still be saved, which needs to be acknowledged at the same time as processing the grief. Yes. Victoria says, makes us feel less alone. Rabbi Yossi says, reframing Tisha B'Av from past destruction to the destruction we're undergoing now. Yes, thank you, Rabbi. And that's exactly why we're having this event. So thank you for picking up on that. And Ahava Lilith says, so good to be in community with others who feel the same level of grief. Or he says, if we don't, it can make us stagnant, numb, and shut down. Yes, yes. Ronan says, even imagining the place I love and that feels like home in the first moment brought up such deep grief for the ways it's been harmed by climate change. Yes, we can all take a breath there. Yes, thank you. And there's so many other shares in the chat that I won't read out loud for now, but please feel free to read yourselves. These are such great shares. I would love to just talk very briefly about my own experience. The first time I really felt grief thinking about climate change, just really briefly. And I was on a train from New York City to the Hudson Valley, which is where I grew up. And I was looking out the window and it just dawned on me very suddenly in the way that sometimes these things do that, time is passing. This is a moment that will soon be passing also. Sometimes we have these moments where we're suddenly very aware of ourselves in time and space. And yeah, it just became quite clear to me that the places that I was seeing and the water that I was running, the train was running by and the trees and the fields they're all in danger. And it just became devastatingly clear. And this was probably about 10 years ago at the time. So yeah, that was my own experience on thinking about grief and climate change for the first time. And yeah, so just wanted to share that as one other example. So this is not just an individual, but a collective experience is what I'm really getting at here. Also, just from the shares in the chat, we don't have these feelings in isolation, so we can't act in isolation. And that brings me to this framework. So we'll be sharing in a little bit a booklet that Recustom created for you called 7 Rituals to Cope with a Changing Climate. And it's framed in this time space from Tisha B'Av through the last day of Elul, so but right before Rosh Hashanah. And just to briefly touch on these 3 touch points, Tisha B'Av, Tu B'Av, and Elul. So as the rabbi mentioned earlier, Tisha B'Av is, what does this mean for us today, the destruction of the temple? What happens if we consider Earth as our temple today, and that is being destroyed? If we think about Tu B'Av, just 1 week later, we move from mourning into dancing. How can we bring joy into this work, even if it is grief for so many of us as well? How can we bring hope and joy and, some of the other emotions that may feel far off sometimes, but also perhaps not. Perhaps in gatherings like these, we do feel some joy and some hope. And then lastly, Elul, we begin the season of returning to our highest selves. And I see that kind of as a connection to, as a journey to reconnect with our values, with what's really present for us of interdependence and claiming our own agency to really stand up against climate change and climate destruction. And I'll just go through this very briefly, but in terms of considering ritual and why ritual here, why ritual now? Well, ritual really supports us in moments of transformation. And what is this if not a giant, huge moment of transformation that keeps unfurling and unfurling as time goes by? It can also really help to mark the passage of time to help us cope with challenges. It additionally, a ritual will also create a special space and time out of the in-between. So, if we think of climate change as this kind of sometimes it feels like a rush towards a future that we're not ready for. Ritual can kind of say, okay, but just stop for a moment, take some time to pause, take some time to breathe. And that could be really revitalizing for us. And so I'm going to just share with you a little bit about some ritual building blocks, because while the booklet that we will share with you does have rituals in it, we also highly encourage you to adapt the rituals as you wish, to add to them, to, remix them, do anything that makes you feel most at home in them with yourself. And so there's a couple of things, I won't spend too much time here, but there's a couple of things to know about ritual. And one is that rituals should have a purpose or a kavanah. And that can be pretty clear in climate change, that the purpose might be asking for help. It might be finding a moment to rest, to rejuvenate. It can be gratitude for how far we've come. It can be gratitude for each other. It can also be, wow, celebration, adoration of life. Rituals should also have a keva, container, and sacred space and time. So beginning, a middle, and end, and transitions in and out of that moment. I'm going to skip this next slide because we're running a little bit behind, but just going to move forward to why ritual in the face of climate change. So we've talked about this a little bit, but would love to hear some folks in the chat just share why you are interested, if you are, in turning to ritual at this time, and what are some other ways that you can think of that ritual might help to help us to really step into our own agency here. I'll just take a drink of water for just a moment. Okay. That's okay. It's also okay to just have a little bit of more time to think. But for now, we will go. Oh, looks like one person. Great. Yes, connect with our deeper indigenous roots. Yes, so connecting with our own ancestry and our own, yes, what roots us into the earth and our cultures. Absolutely. Let me just go back one slide. Ritual can provide stability when all around us is moving. Yes, it's grounding. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to stop there for now. So I will just share one brief example of one of the rituals that is in this booklet that we will be sharing with you. This is a tashlich ritual. So you may know tashlich from Rosh Hashanah. Tashlich is traditionally a ritual where we cast bread traditionally, but these days more folks are often willing to cast stones or pebbles or leaves or flower pieces, anything that's not necessarily harmful to wildlife. And tashlich is just this moment where we can ask ourselves what we want to release for the year coming in and what we want to cast off for the year coming in. And so in this tashlich that we wrote for specifically for climate grief and climate change, we were really thinking about how to, what we necessarily want to release among many other things that, that's really plaguing our society right now. So we have consumerism, we have fast fashion, tech gadgets, fossil fuels, international travel, and perhaps above all, individualism and competition. This mindset that we are not supposed to work together. I'm just going to check the chat. Awesome. Yes, there's a lot of great conversations happening here. So I totally welcome those and welcome you folks to chime in if you would like. And with that, we're going to skip this actually also because we're running a little bit behind still, but I would love to introduce at this point our guest speakers. So today we are joined by Rabbi Laura Bellows. So happy to have you here. She's the Director of Spiritual Activism and Education at Dayenu. And Madeline Canfield will also be joining us afterwards, the Jewish Youth Climate Movement Organizing Coordinator at Adamah. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will introduce Rabbi Laura more directly with just a little bit about her. So Rabbi Laura Bellows is Dayenu's Director of Spiritual Activism and Education. She leads Dayenu's spiritual adaptation, music and arts, and climate Torah work, engaging Jewish communities across the country in facing the climate crisis, grounding in Jewish wisdom and creativity, and cultivating the spiritual audacity and bold action to build a climate-resilient, just, and joyous world. She lives in Boston, Massachusetts, and can often be found dreaming up new rituals, biking the city, and moonlighting as a Soferet scribe. Thank you so much, Laura. It's so wonderful to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Elliot and Recustom. And it's so good to be with all of you. I feel like we have already entered an open heart space in the chat. And in the time I have, I want to invite people a little bit more there and also share some of the ways that that Dayenu is approaching hopeful action, where we go from here, since we believe that action is one antidote to despair. So first of all, people already, Elliot led us in naming some of the reasons why we make space to honor grief. And there's so much wisdom that was shared in the chat. I'll add that one verse, one phrase I often turn to is from Psalm 126, which sometimes we say to kick off Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals. It's Hazorem Bedima Berina Yiksoru, that those who sow in tears reap in joy. And I saw some people mention this in the chat, but the idea that as uncomfortable as it can be, that making some time and space to honor our pain for the world, to honor some of the grief and fear and uncertainty and anger that may come up around the climate crisis is a way of not getting stuck in it. And one of the things that we've been doing this past few years at Dayenu is running spiritual adaptation workshops to help people metabolize and process some of that grief and move to hopeful action. So I wanted to share with you the prompts that we share as part of that, which we frame in the context of this line, those who plant in tears reap in joy, because we really believe that it is from making some space for this that we are able to vision, imagine, hopeful action in relationship with all of life. We're just going to blur the background there. There we go. And we are holding that joy that can come from kind of planting in making space for our grief. We're holding that joy with a lot of preciousness too, that joy is not simply happiness. It is actually a sorrow along with all that may come, all the possibility of a better and just future. So join me in the chat at this Jamboard. We're going to spend a couple minutes here. And I am actually, okay, great. So in this Jamboard, the way it works is on the first page, these are the 4 prompts, well, 3 of the 4 prompts that we often use at our spiritual adaptation workshops. I'm angry, I'm afraid, I'm grieving. And I added today, I wonder, because we've been noticing, wanting to make space for some of the uncertainty that we're sitting with too. So this is just another invitation. We're going to spend the next minute and a half or so. On the left-hand side, there's a little square symbol with lines. That's a sticky note. And you can click on that. It'll pop up with a new sticky note. You can type in whatever you want, save it, and it'll appear on this board. So I invite you to go ahead and do that. And if I can have screen share permission, I'll share some music as we do that. I'm going to fade out that music there. I know some people can't access the Jamboard. We have a full room, so sorry about that. And I know many people shared in the chat as well. I invite those of you who can access the Jamboard, or if you want to check out that link later, in some of the later slides there is a bit of the visual story of our collective grief. So we are about to enter, as Elliot mentioned, we're in the season of Tisha B'Av, in which we, as a Jewish people, have a lot of wisdom in terms of what it means to hold and honor pain, move through that, and move to a place of transformation and possibility. So on the Jamboard pages that come next are some images from this past year's spiritual adaptation workshops that Dayenu ran, of other people's sticky notes, of griefs and pains and sorrow and fears and all the different things that have been coming up. And I just want to say, there's a lot of repetition. I just was playing the song from Ali Halpert and Anat Hochberg called "I'm Not Alone," because this has been one of the big messages that I have taken away from this past year of processing grief with Jewish communities across the US, is that we're not alone. We have many, many resonances, many things that, you know, I feel, that you're feeling, that other people are feeling. And we also have a lot of ways in which each of us are being affected by this climate crisis differently, for all different reasons, from, you know, class to ability to identity to where we live geographically in this country. So we are together in that grief. And we also are together in our ability to take bold action. The good news is we have what we need. Dayenu named itself Dayenu. Rabbi Jenny Rosen named it Dayenu, in part because Dayenu means enough. We have enough. We have what we need for these times, and also enough already. It's time for bold and audacious climate action. We have the Torah, the music, the collective power to do something about this and to save all that we can. So I am delighted to share with you in a couple of minutes here. I'm delighted to share with you a little bit of a teaching from Rebecca Solnit. She talks about hope. Rebecca Solnit, if you haven't read her work, I highly recommend it. If you're looking for a way to transition from to hold the grief and the sorrow, and also a sense of active hope and where we go from here. She talks about hope as, in its most active sense, as the ability to trust that through action, a more just and livable world may yet come. And in the context of climate change, active hope is necessary. It's a practice. It's like a muscle that we use that can help counter some of the feelings of helplessness and despair. The difference, she writes, and in her most recent book, this isn't a book talk for Rebecca Solnit, but big plug for it. She writes that the difference, and we know that the difference between the worst outcomes of this climate crisis and the best ones are huge, and that we can help make those better outcomes possible. There are times, of course, when it can feel totally overwhelming and can be hard to know where to start. But again, the good news is that not only can we not do this alone, but we need each other. We have to do this together. The work ahead and the solutions are not individual, but are systemic. And the kind of powerful movements that we need to make a difference have to be built together. So I want to share with you just a few things that you can plug into, resources. You know, I'm excited to check out the rituals, Elliot. Yeah, that's wonderful. Ritual is one of the great tools that we have in our, I would say, Jewish toolbox. Another one is music, to help sort of spiritually resource us for these times, to live in a climate changed and changing world. I'm gonna drop in the chat. Here is, for those moments when you're like, I just really need some music to get me through this, or the smoke is really bad, or you're stuck inside because of the heat, or whatever it is. Like, one of the things that I have turned to is the wisdom of what we call cultural artists, people who are deep in the world of creativity and Jewish creativity. So here's a link to Dayenu's songbook that we launched this spring. There are links to play all the different songs. So you can even just sit there and just listen to lots of music. The second thing I wanted to share is that, as I mentioned, one antidote to despair is remembering our own power, is taking action. So we have coming up very shortly on July 31st, a virtual rally, and I'm just going to paste that in the chat and then wrap up because I want to make sure that Maddie has time to. So on July 31st, we are partnering with the RAC, with the Religious Action Center, of course, it's okay, messed up in the chat, but I'll paste it in a moment. We're organizing this virtual rally that is going to be an opportunity to send comments to the EPA about the rules that they're using that limit limiting carbon from power plants, which is something that we can do right now to curb 1/4 of the US's climate pollution. So this is the link to register, and you can join us and Jewish Youth Climate Movement, who you'll hear from in a moment, in action, in hopeful action. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Rabbi Laura. So many beautiful ways to tune in and get to work. Thank you. And thank you also for really grounding us in the grief and the hope that is this work. All right. So next, I just want to note also before I introduce Madeline Canfield that we are running a little behind. So we probably will go over. If you do have to leave in 5 minutes, that is totally fine. Totally understand. We will send this recording to everyone who is here and all the folks who are registered and who couldn't make it tonight. So no worries, you will definitely be able to see the whole thing if you can't stay. But with that put out of the way, I'm really excited to introduce Madeline Canfield. So Madeline is the organizing coordinator for the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, a project of Adamah. She joined Adamah with a background in youth climate justice activism, having previously organized with the Sunrise Movement, co-founded Houston Youth Climate Strike, co-led the youth working group for the City of Houston Climate Action Plan, and served on the Zero Hour Partnerships team. She is currently a student at Brown University where she studies English. Welcome, Madeline. So wonderful to have you here.
Thank you all so much for having me. Let's see. Yep, I'm muted. So nice to be here. So nice to have you. So nice to get to be in community with Rabbi Bellows, who I admire so deeply, and I think we have very similar philosophies on the relationship between action and ritual. And I want to not take up too much time because I know we're behind, but I thought I would start a little bit with the story that I have. So I started my climate activism multiple years ago. I'm currently 21, I'm a member of Gen Z, I'm a young person. And I started my activism on climate when I was about 17. So it was about 4 or 5 years ago at this point. And I've been telling a certain story and it's gone through many iterations. And I think to me, it always had this certain grief and Jewish history resonance that it wasn't until I started organizing in the Jewish climate movement that I really got to share. But I am from a city on the front line of the climate crisis, the front lines. I'm from Houston, Texas, where when I was in middle school, it started that we would have terrible floods, and these floods would come and ravage the streets. It would turn concrete streets into essentially rivers. It would be rapids flushing out people, my friends from their homes, fellow peers from our schools, there was even a flood that inundated students while they were at school. And there was so much fear going on with my friends who were fellow organizers at lots of different high schools about whether the buses were going to run or our parents were going to be able to pick us up, whether we would be in danger of getting home, if we would be stranded overnight. And there were many times where the Jewish community locally was really hit hard, and our synagogues or the federations or the JCCs, or even like the community, historic community businesses and bakeries and grocery stores were flooded out, and we was seeing this whole community infrastructure being displaced from its history. And I had friends who were separated from their families for months after being flooded out. I had friends who had scar gashes on their legs from the bacteria that had invaded into their skin while they were wading into the sewage infested floodwaters to escape from their homes. I even had a friend who lost a family member on the eve of his sister's graduation due to one of these floods. And I would sit next to these people in classes. They would inspire my work. And for so long, these storms became normal. What would happen is one of them would happen, and then the media would call this a 100-year flood or a 500-year flood. And what that means is that statistically, these sorts of weather patterns are supposed to happen once in 100 years. And every year there's a 1 in 100 likelihood this sort of thing's going to happen, or once in 500 years. And if you have a once in 500-year storm happening every 2 years, every 3 years, every single year, I started to wonder what time meant and how I was losing time right before my eyes, and how centuries, which to me were so significant because of my Jewish upbringing in the way that we conceive of time as vast, but also with so much memory, with so much capacity to look at what has been lost and to see it still present, as if, to see it as if I had gone forth from Sinai myself, as if the Torah and the tradition had been handed to me, as if the temple had been destroyed again and again and again, as if when we look at, the history of the teaching of Tisha B'Av, which is so much that Jewish calamities throughout history all coincided on that date of the 9th of Av, the first temple destroyed and the second temple destroyed, but then, historically, various revolts and expulsions all kind of tied to that date, that these things keep happening again and again, and we have a recursive sense of memory. And so on one hand, that is a source of great grief, that how am I losing my own history, my capacity to experience the expansiveness of centuries, the centuries being lost in a single year, but then also to see the potentiality of it, to see how much we can draw from that span of centuries to respond to the existential. So when I think about climate grief, I think about this story. And when I think about climate grief, I think increasingly about Tisha B'Av and that question of what we are taking from us. I've been thinking a lot about Tisha B'Av. Well, last year, my organization did a protest in front of the White House with our whole teen board, which was the first time we had all taken action together. And it was a couple days after Tisha B'Av, so we centered it around it. And I've been thinking about it then, and I've been thinking about it now, and how it feels in some ways so long ago, right? What is the point of memorializing this destruction that is so distant from our own lives, when really two things happened in that moment? It was a complete loss of everything the Jewish community knew, but it was also the birth of 2,000 years of diaspora and diaspora Judaism, really rabbinic Judaism as we know it, which is a flourishing, gorgeous thing that brought many hardships, but also that taught us what a tradition is, taught us what it is to rebuild something new out of disaster, and taught us how to survive existential threats. And to me, when I talk about the climate crisis and the connection with Jewish history and Jewish collectivity and community, that term is really operative for me, existential threat. The climate crisis is a great existential threat of our time. You might hear that phrase a lot. The climate crisis is existential threat, the greatest one of our time. I don't know, I'm not here to provide absolutes greatest. We're experiencing democratic challenges. We're experiencing the intersections with horrendous oppressions and racism and white supremacy and white Christian nationalism and, the rise of anti-Semitism again. And all these things coalesce. When we look at the existential, to me, how we learn how to weather it is to look at something like Tisha B'Av and say, this changed our very understanding of existence, but in that loss, there was survival to something new. And we have so many iterations of this throughout Jewish history. So to me, the significance of grief is that we must grieve what we have lost only in order, we can only until we have grieved what we have lost, can we understand that we have survived, and can we learn how to survive? And the grieving process will continue. So I believe that we will come up with ways to weather this climate crisis. I am very desperate for expansive climate policy solutions and for them to be timely. And I also increasingly fear that they will not come fast enough and that they will not be bold enough to stave off the worst impacts. And no matter what happens, there will be much loss and much survival. And I know that we will have to keep grieving at every step of the surviving process. And that's where we will create new rituals and create new processes. And to me, that is really what we're doing at JYCM, which is thinking about these two elements of Jewish collectivity and how Jewish collectivity can be a source of existence. And so in social movement theory, there are a lot of different ways to create change. The big one that we talk a lot about all the time is the sense of changing dominant institutions. So groups of people will mobilize into the streets and push for policy changes and get lots of people structurally organized to call on their elected officials to create changes. And that's primarily what my organization does. It's primarily what Dayenu does. Kind of we're trained in those movement schools. And to do that, we're really pursuing this sort of ideological approach to how do we imbue our current world, which is based on philosophies of extractivism and oppression, white supremacy, racism, patriarchy, anti-Semitism, absolutely, Christian nationalism, all tied to extractivism and the fossil fuel and colonialism. And how do we replace them with wisdoms that are based in land and climate, such as indigenous wisdom, such as absolutely Jewish wisdom. So in one sense, the world, I think we need to change dominant institutions by structuring our world around things like Jewish wisdom. And so we're trying to create. But in another, there is a theory of social movements in which we create alternatives to the present. And I think that one of the ways that we do that is by hearkening back to the practices of Jewishness. And so when we practice the rituals of Tisha B'Av or any practice, sometimes it's celebratory. We might have a climate inflected Purim in which we are, going all for celebration and no sadness, but then we also take those times to be in great senses of grief. But in using the tradition itself, that is a way that we are creating maybe that's alternative institutions, Dayenu and JYCM are alternatives to climate grief and to ways in which we are seeing the loss, but it's also an alternative to despair and an alternative to just living with that loss, in which we can retreat into, but it's not really a retreat. I think it's a source of vitality and sustenance. It's a retreat into our own communities and collectives and cultures and the practice, and to use prayer as this somatic thing, and to use ritual as this spiritual and nourishing thing. And that we need to be doing two things at once. We need to be fighting for the future, and we need to be figuring out how to live in the present. To me, that's really important. And I think sometimes we elide that second part. How do we even just be alive and whole and sustained in the present? So kind of to close it out, I wanted to say a little bit about how we at Jewish Youth Climate Movement conceive of what we have a lot of acronyms, and we love it, it's our own cute culture, and we have a tenet of JYCM, or an element of practices we call JRC, which stands for Jewish Ritual and Culture. And I love it because I think Jewishness and Judaism is hard to pin down in terms of what noun is it. But to us, we're really interested in the ritual part of it and the creation of culture and the maintenance of it, because we have a culture to protect, and that culture is itself wise. So we orchestrate actions that tell stories, ones that draw the connection between climate justice and a resilient Jewish future. I mean that we're in the streets and we're doing Jewishness. We're writing stories, we're writing op-eds, we're making art, we're sharing public narratives, we're protesting for divestment from fossil fuels, we're testifying at our local synagogues and institution meetings, we're lobbying for policies, and we're doing more. These actions center Jewish teachings and ritual because we cherish the timeless beauty of the culture and of our movement protects. And by grounding our movement in Jewishness, we're also legitimizing our work to the leaders and community members that we organize. We're orienting our whole frame of reference and the progression of Jewish communal climate action around the Shemitah cycle, which is this millennium-old earth-based Jewish practice of letting the earth rest every 7 years. So our whole climate theory is based in Jewishness. And using Shemitah, we're asking our own communities, which side are you on? Come take action with us. Our ritual, our culture, our text, our history are tools of strength and a reminder of what we fight to protect. We seek to create a Jewish home for those who've been alienated or ostracized in the Jewish context. We're revitalizing the trove of what compels us in our tradition as we innovate Gen Z justice-based Jewish content, including songs, text studies, climate stories, drawing from literary and religious texts, Divrei Torah, Shabbat services, holiday programs, and rituals. And to us, that's so important because by giving Jewish home to teens, we're also fighting the climate crisis because we're figuring out ways to live. It's all about changing those dominant institutions in the future, but finding alternatives in the present. And some small action steps I have for you, I can put in the chat. I've already talked way too long. Policy-wise, there is what Rabbi Bellows shared. There's also an opportunity for you all to support this Fossil-Free Finance Act. JYCM does a lot of work on climate finance, and it's using Congress to asking them to co-sponsor this bill that will push for banks to stop funding fossil fuel projects, which is really cool because it's not usually a bill. And there's going to be a lobby day in early August around this, which is why I share it. And my organization is also trying to get every Jewish institution to write a climate action plan. And this is called the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition. And I urge you to please take a look and consider sending it to your institutional leaders, or if you are an institutional leader, sign on. And then also a little bit of inspiration. Rabbi Bellows had a really nice practice. I wanted to share let me make sure I have the right link. Give you apply. This is a tech study around climate and Tisha B'Av that my organization did within a protest, during protest a year ago. And speaking of which, here is a link to imagery about that protest. If you scroll on Instagram, you can see that how we used action and mourning. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you all find ways to engage with us. And if you have young people in your world, please send them our way. We would love to organize with them.
Wow. Thank you, Madeline. That was incredible. Thank you so much for that wisdom, for all of those, really incredible things that you've said and have brought to this space. We really appreciate that. And yes, definitely, if anyone is interested in signing up to work more with Adamah or Dayenu, feel free to go follow those links that our guest speakers put in the chat. Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen one more time as we wrap up. Okay, so I would just would love to take a brief look at this excerpt from A Prayer for Healing the Planet, which is again in our 7 weekly Rituals for a Changing Climate booklet. If you have a phone that can use QR codes, feel free to hold it up to your screen and click on that QR code, and you can download the booklet that way. You can also go to the bit.ly link, which I think will be in the chat. There it is. Thanks, Rebecca. And so again, thank you so much. We are so grateful to have you all here. I would love to hear in just as we wrap up, if anyone wants to put in the chat one thing that they're taking away from today's session. I think people have already been doing that, but would love to just see maybe one word from folks in the chat, which can get maybe a chat-scade or a cascade of chats going as folks start to put into the chat what they're taking with them. Thankful, connected in grief. Amazing. Yes, this is so wonderful to see. Thank you, everyone. And yes, feel free to keep putting those in the chat, and I will just share one brief plug to support Recustom. If you've enjoyed this webinar and you've gotten something from it, it does not cost nothing to produce, so please feel free to, if you are able, to send us a donation. We would sincerely appreciate that. We also understand if you cannot at this time, we will always be accessible to anyone at any level of money that they can, give to us, whether it's none or whether it's a lot. We appreciate either way. We appreciate you being here. And thank you so much to everyone who's joined. We really hope to see you again soon at one of our webinars or on our mailing list. And yes, thank you again so much to everyone who has joined. And we will be following up with all of our resources by email with the replay. If you want to watch anything again, we will have everything available for you. So thank you again so much.